Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're excited to have you here. We're excited to have some esteemed guests to share their experience. Thank you for your time this afternoon. And we're going to cover meeting some assessors, get an inside tour of some of the process and what goes into getting an assessment. I'm Toby Musser, co-CEO of M&S Group. We're just going to go through a brief introduction. We're going to go over the roles of an assessor, what happens before, during, and how you get your certificate if you need that, lessons learned, and question and answer at the end. So feel free to put in your questions in the chat while we go through it. We'll jump in and try to address those questions at the end. And thank you again for being here. Today we have Michael Dempsey, Colin Bowers, and Brian Hubbard, each the leaders of their own C3POs or candidate C3POs. And they've all participated in many assessments. I totaled it up, and I think between all of them, there's more than 60 assessments under their belts or under their respective companies' belts. So we have some great information for you today and great resources. So let's go through the introductions here. Again, as I mentioned, Toby Musser, co-CEO of M&S Group. We have a lot of people who are trained. We really believe in helping the ecosystem and sharing our staff with others. We are an MSP and a C3PO and an RPO. Although we can't do all those things for the same organization, we can help in any one of them. Michael, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Dempsey. I'm part of CISEVE, and we are one of the first C3PAOs, and that's how we got to that 60 number that Toby just mentioned. We've been here since the beginning. We focus on assessments only, unlike Toby and the other folks. So that's all we do, which is why our count is so high. So we look forward to this call and hopefully working with you in the future.
Thank you. Colin, go ahead.
Thank you, Toby. At the beginning of my career, I was a DoD civilian employee. Then I became a defense contractor. Now I'm an assessor. So with my background, probably everyone on this call has a reason to dislike me. But hopefully, in spite of that, or maybe because of my diverse background, there will be actionable information coming from me, or more likely one of my colleagues on this call. So at least that's our goal for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Brian, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I'm Brian Hubbard. I'm president of Evolve Cyber. 40 plus years of experience in cybersecurity, or whatever you wanted to call it, way back in the 80s when I started. But worked at NSA, Booz Allen Hamilton, some small companies, started a C3PO at one company, moved on. Now I'm starting a C3PO at my new company at Evolve Cyber. I am the candidate C3PO. That is Toby was talking about. And I've been doing assessments since the inception of, I don't know. I guess I've been doing assessments of one type or another for 40 years, but CMMC assessments and 800-171 assessments, I've been doing those since 2015. 800-171, of course, before in 2015. And I am a lead CCA, and I am a provisional instructor. And Evolve Cyber is an authorized training provider. So we're providing the CCP and CCA classes for those of you in the ecosystem that need that education.
Brian, you do publishing as well, right? You're providing materials?
We're also an approved publishing partner, and we're developing the curriculum for the new round of curriculum and the new tests.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see that when that comes out.
Me too.
All right, here's the disclaimer. We would all love to help you with your assessment. So we can't offer any implementation guidance or advice during this webinar. We certainly can answer questions about the process, or maybe how to submit information or format questions, but we can't give you anything about how to implement or adjust your own environment. So if you ask those questions, we'll have to pass over them, or you could retain one of us as your consultant, but then we could not offer any assessments to you. All right, we're going to have a poll now, I believe. We're kick this off. If you could take a moment and answer this poll. All right. Got about 60% of you responding. Thank you for that. We're jumping up. It looks like a lot of people are looking at quarter 2. Some are thinking quarter 3, and the balance are sometimes in 2026 or not sure yet. So that's kind of what we're seeing across the market, and I appreciate you giving us that feedback. And there you go. You can take a moment to see that. And we're going to move ahead now and talk a little bit about the roles of an assessor. Colin, could you talk a little bit about what is a CCA?
So stands for CMMC, Cybersecurity Certified Assessor. But I'll talk to it in the scope of an assessment team. So you'll have a lead CCA and another CCA that supports the assessment. There's also a quality assurance person who's involved as well. So while the two CCAs are there to interview, examine your documentation, look at demonstrations on of your security protections, the quality assurance person is there to make sure the assessors are following the process correctly. So the CCAs will make a determination for the 320 security control objectives. Are they met, or ultimately are they met or not met, or not applicable? So that's the short verbiage of what a CCA is.
All right, thank you, Colin. That was fantastic. Michael, could you talk about our guidelines, so the CAP?
Absolutely. So the CAP is produced by the Cyber AB. It's not a DoD document. The CMMC assessment process is the process that all C3POs must follow to conduct your assessment. Now, they may personalize it and do it their own way in own timeframes, but they have to follow the steps that are within the assessment process. So this is the guideline on what you should expect from a C3PO and the assessment process. It's out there for everyone to look at, not just C3PO, so you know what to expect when we show up and start asking questions and what that looks like. So all the different phases, establishing your relationship with the C3PAO, preparing for it, conducting the interviews and the assessments, and then doing the final report, plus the remediation phase if that's needed. It also identifies appeals process. So if you pass and you want to appeal, there's an appeal process. I don't want to be negative, so it's defined in there, and each C3PO will have a unique one for each of their organizations. So the CAP is just the guideline of how the process will work.
So, Michael, I want to double click on your comment about the different timelines, and Brian and Colin, if you want to jump in here, what are you seeing in terms of different C3POs? I know that you've helped a bunch of different C3POs as well as your own, in terms of how long it takes to go through an assessment process.
It's a good question, and like I said, everyone's a little bit different, but I've seen people trying to squeeze it into 2 weeks, which you may want to think twice about that. But you can go anywhere from 4 weeks up to 4 months. I've seen organizations saying that it's going to take them 4 months to get through the whole process. So again, not on the screen, but talk to multiple C3PAOs. Everyone has a different approach. Pick someone who's going to work with you, and that you can get along with, so to speak.
Yeah, I should point out too that what Michael's talking about is accurate, right? The calendar time varies, right? But it's not an intensive 4 months. So if somebody's saying it's going to spread across 4 months, there's a scoping call, then there's some documentation review, and then you get into what we call the assessment week, right? And when there's an intensive up to 5 day, typically up to 5 day set interview process, right? And that will vary as well. on how long that takes, and then on the back end of the reporting and things. So the calendar time can kind of come and go. But to Michael's point, yeah, if somebody says, "Oh, we're going to do everything from the scoping call all the way through reporting in 2 weeks," that's a little aggressive. It's going to take longer than that, and it should take longer than that because the assessor has a lot of preparation to do as part of the CAP phase one, and then there's a lot on the back end to do as well.
Well,
Should
thank you for
also,
that. Go ahead.
related to that, as a organization seeking certification in OSC, you probably don't want the duration to be too short. You may need the extra time to present new evidence to the assessors and not constrain yourself to Michael's example, a 2-week period.
Yeah, and I know we said we would take questions at the end, but there's a question here that is really pertinent right now, and that's it comes from Will asking, what is the timeline for booking an assessment when on-site visits will be required? Does that really affect the timeline for booking?
For booking it, no, it just extends that duration that Brian was
Right.
mentioning. Generally, they conduct the assessment interview week. So that's when you're demonstrating everything. And depending on the number of sites you have and where they are located in the country, usually that would be a week after that is the best approach. So everyone can focus on all the questions. The site visits generally don't take very long. There's 18 objectives, which are identified in both the CAP and the rule, that have to be conducted in person if you have CUI locally at that site. So it would depend, right? The typical IT answer, it depends. How many sites? Does it have data? Is it printing? Is it storing? What is its function there for managing the CUI? But typically it's the next week that they schedule it out.
All right, thank you for that. All right, Brian, could you talk a little bit about some of the things the assessors can and can't do?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of those. More on the can't do than there are than the can do. But assessors are, the whole point of CMMC is standardization, right? So all the CMMC assessors have gone through the same training, not necessarily by the same trainer, but they go through the same set of curriculum and all pass the same exam to become a certified assessor. So they're all trained in the same techniques and the same review process, so that there's an equal playing field. Basically, for all assessments should be at least somewhat similar, and not be way divergent. So we are also trained that all environments are going to be different. So there's no one answer. So again, like it says here, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for that you meet the intent of the requirement. And if the intent of the requirement is met, then you meet that control, right? We don't, what we can't do, we can't help you fix anything. So if we find something that's not met, we can tell you why it's not met, but we can't tell you how to fix it. All right. That would be a conflict of interest. We can't evaluate our own stuff, right? Um, and we don't decide policy, but we enforce the model, right? So we don't change the policy as we go. We enforce what we have been told is enforceable, and we're actually going by the book, 32 CFR Part 170, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, and it's the definition of the CMMC program. That is what drives everything, including the CAP, which we showed you a picture of the CMMC assessment process. Are liable if they breach the rules of conduct. So we all abide in the CMC ecosystem by a common code of professional conduct, and it is strictly enforced. So if we go off the rails and go and sort of build your system for you, then assess your system for you, well, we're going to lose our certifications. We're going to be drummed out of the ecosystem. So we are definitely liable for that. We take extreme steps to ensure that we have no conflicts of interest going into an assessment, and that we are very strict about not providing guidance and consulting throughout the assessments.
And thank you for that. Colin, we talked a lot about this when you introduced it, but could you talk about the role of the lead assessor, often kind of like a project manager? Could you talk about it?
Yes, and using the phrase project manager, that is exactly right. So there's a preparation part, making sure the OSC knows what to expect throughout the assessment, scheduling both the scoping calls as well as the assessment week so that they've got the time and they've got their subject matter experts available to answer questions during assessment week. What the lead CCA and the CCA will do, Brian covered a lot of the things we can't do. One thing we absolutely can do is ask a lot of questions. And I just want to bring that up from the standpoint of we're here primarily to help you through the process. And CMMC is very much a process. We're not asking questions to try to trip you up. We are really trying to get clarity to get the appropriate evidence to show compliance that you're meeting the 320 security objectives. Looking at the timeline here again, there's the tail end after assessment week where you as the OSC isn't seeing it, but the assessors are finalizing the documentation, making sure what was presented is determined as met, or if it's trending not met, give that feedback that was mentioned of why it's not being met. Then when we do the closing briefing, that is really the official, I shouldn't say official, that's the determination that you've met all the security controls. But that briefing at the tail end isn't a surprise whether you're trending met or not met. Every day during assessment week, there's a checkpoint or a closeout brief that occurs, and that's really a scorecard to show the OSC whether or not what they're trending met on and trending not met on. So it allows the OSC to perhaps present new evidence that would occur during assessment week, or for certain types of evidence, they have up to 10 business days to present that to the assessors, and we would make a determination based on this new evidence. So anything, Michael, Brian, you'd like to add?
No, I mean that's a great description. They're going to manage it. The lead's going to run all your meetings, the daily briefings, any briefings that you have during that week, also, and then they'll conduct the formal outbriefing, which, by the way, is 10 days after the final interviews occur, or final on-site visits occur. And so they'll conduct that, and at that point, if you're successful, you'll receive your UID number. And certificate usually within a day or two of that, if not during that day. So the lead gets all the pleasure of doing the good stuff after the bad stuff.
All right. Moving on, we've talked a little bit about the whole process, the CCAs. Before the assessment, you have to know what level you're going to be at. And so there's 3 levels. FCI is something that you self-attest to, federal contract information, and you want to look in your contract to to know what level you're at. Sections L and M and RFPs and RFIs are going to tell you what the requirements or expectations are. Everybody has to do level one. That's part of the FAR. That's a federal requirement, and of course, it's part of DFARS. If you're at level two, you'll want to understand if you get to self-attest initially or if they're going to expect a certificate. If you self-attest, you must follow the same process as if you're going to get certified, meaning you have to document every artifact or piece of evidence, and you have to be able to prove that. And when you put that in your SPURS or SPRS and you enter your score, the person clicking to submit that is personally and legally responsible for that claim. And you want to make sure that's correct because it's a $250,000 fine and a 20-year jail sentence per false claim, and there's 320 that you're making. So be really careful about that. Level 3 is currently by invitation, although you can volunteer and they may select you. You can't insist or get a level 3 unless you're invited to or they open a volunteer window. Recently, they had a volunteer window open. I don't believe it's currently open, but you can always check and see if you want to be level 3. I suspect most people are concerned right now about just getting to level 2.
So just to clarify on that real quick, Toby, you have to have your level 2 from a C3PAO before you qualify for a level 3.
Hmm.
So the level 3 is just the delta between the 171 and 172. So you still have to go through the level 2 with the C3PAO and then move on to level 3.
Yeah, thank you for that. Brian, could you talk a little bit about the preparation for level 2?
Sure. So, and we're talking about the OSC side of
Yes.
preparation, I assume.
Yes.
So on the OSC side, everything starts, like Toby said, with determining what kind of data you have, right? So understanding where your data, what kind of data you have, where is it in your system? When you talk to your IT team, the IT team will say, "Oh, it's very nicely housed in this server over here, and it's very well contained." And then you talk to the actual folks that are actually executing the business, and they'll say, "Well, it starts there, and then it moves over here, and it moves over there." So it helps you kind of understanding that data flow and where it's flowing around your system will help you understand what parts of your system should be in scope for the assessment so that you can better understand, well, should I leave it that way or should I re-architect that and bring it all back together into a smaller set of systems, and that'll vary based on your business and that sort of thing. But that determining that scope is a really critical first step and really understanding what parts of your environment, what parts of your business need to be in scope, and what parts of your IT infrastructure need to be in scope. Definitely going through a process with a trained professional is a good idea. And that process can start all the way from getting your documentation ready. Document is a very documentation intensive process or assessment, and it's critical that you're operating the way that you're meeting the controls. You can't just say I'm meeting the controls and here I made up some stuff to say I'm meeting the controls. You actually have to be doing this stuff, right? And the assessors are going to verify that. So going through that self-assessment with a trained professional is a really good idea. Going through a mock assessment, which is when you actually have a lead CCA or a CCA come in and actually run you through an assessment exactly the way it would be done in a formal assessment with no consulting. And that way, if it's a C3PO coming in to do it, that C3PO can be your assessor when you go for your formal level 2. But going through that process too gives you that dry run, that dress rehearsal. It helps your team get prepared. And that preparation of your team is a really critical piece so that your assessment goes smoothly and that you can quickly go through all the controls and know exactly what you're going to demonstrate, exactly what you're going to show the assessors. And if you do that, everything will go really smoothly on that assessment week. And then creation of or update of documentation. So along the way, there may be you're going to go through gap assessments and self-assessments and things like that potentially, whether it be internal or facilitated. And there are going to be things that you're going to need to update in your environment. So you need to get those updated, you need to get those things in place before you go into your formal assessment. And of course, all gaps for compliance reasons, all compliance gaps have to be remediated before you start the formal level two process.
Thank you for that, Brian. Uh, Michael, could you just talk a little more about the mock assessment process? Brian mentioned that it's like a real assessment. Talk through that a little.
Yeah. So mock assessments are, like Brian said, exactly like a certifying assessment. And these actually go back to, I remember the first 3 or 4 companies that were fully certified under the joint surveillance, and all of them agreed that having the mock or practice run through was the best thing they did in preparation. The mock assessment will follow the same steps, the same procedures. They'll follow the CAP and do all the steps so that you understand what the real assessment's going to be like, and you will get a feel for where you are at in that. Do you have the right evidence collected? They'll be reviewing, the screenshots and documentation and procedures just as they would in a certifying assessment. So again, the experience is what's most valuable about it. And with the secondary factor of, what am I missing, is brought to light. You learn a lot. Without consulting, you kind of learn a lot from the assessor's questions. Hey, we're looking for this. Do you have it? No, you kind of know what you need to do, right? Without us telling you to implement anything. We're asking for things to support it, and what would demonstrate it is the point of view that the assessor is taking during this time. So you can learn a lot about your environment and what you need to get past the certifying assessment.
Michael, is there a world where you don't get 110 in a mock and you still could proceed?
You don't get 110 and you proceed? Well,
Right. Like I think you had mentioned the 3s and 5s and some required 1s and the possibility of getting a conditional.
so the condition will be under the certifying assessment.
Yeah.
Once you
So
get
if they go through a mock and they pass all their 3s and 5s and the required 1s and they're under pressure for some reason, maybe a contract or a prime requirement, it's possible that they could get a conditional.
Yes, depending on the C3PAO, and ensuring that they've conducted the exact same as the certifying assessment, which is the key here. If so, at the end of the mock, if you don't pass, only the assessor and right? The C3PO and you. It's once you start getting into the certifying part of it, once it becomes quote unquote real assessment, all of that gets reported. So if they're going to get a conditional, it then kind of has to go back through the process.
Yeah.
And be submitted into EMAS and things like that.
Thank you for clarifying. All right, Colin, could you talk about sort of that pre-assessment checklist?
Sure. Just one comment on the mock assessment. The mock assessments that I've led have been a great stress reliever for the OSCs. Just body language after we've gone through a mock, it's just, 180 on that. So highly recommend it. Okay, pre-assessment check. So the CAP, the CMMC assessment process that Michael covered. What happens per the process is the first thing we get as an assessor is just an initial SSP. So we look at that, we prepare for what we call a scoping call. And so having that initial SSP in the scoping call, you as a organization seeking certification, you should be using the questions that the assessors are asking you during the scoping call to help you with once again, assessors, we're not giving advice, help you identify what may be lacking in your SSP. So keep that in mind. as you go through the process. So after the scoping call and the assessor determining that you're ready to move on to phase two, and this may be a different slide, but at that point, there would be more of the documentation presented. But at that scoping call, we may ask you, an assessor may ask you, hey, show us certain policies and procedures. We're just checking to see that they exist. We're not checking that they're sufficient as far as the evidence in them to show compliance for certain security controls. So, as I said before, at the end of the purpose, or one of the purposes of that scoping call, is to make that determination: are you ready? Are you the OSC ready to move on to giving us your final SSP and your documentation, so that we can spend a week or so reviewing it, and then have the assessment week where we would either virtually or sometimes face to face go through each of the security control domains and the security control objectives within those domains.
Thank you for that. So we're going to move to what happens during the assessment. And Colin, if you could just continue and just briefly, we're going to have slides for each of these, but go through sort of what a complete process looks like. It's not just getting an assessment.
Yeah, so I mentioned phase one, and we're calling that the pre-assessment, but I think this slide is appropriate, saying it's the planning of that. So we'll do a security assessment plan with the OSC, so that we've got not just we're scheduling, this on Monday, this on Tuesday, this on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so that they can have the appropriate SMEs there. But we're also making sure we've got the right cage codes. We've got the right name of their company, so that when we do submit everything to the government through EMAS and disperse, that the right information is going in there. So we are very diligent about checking and rechecking with the OSC that we've got the right information from them. Phase two is what we would call, let's just call it the actual assessment. And I call it the actual assessment because we are now looking for the evidence showing compliance for the security controls. Phase one, we're trying to see if you've got it right. Phase two, we're actually doing some assessing that it's compliant. So after phase two, the bulk of it is the assessment week. Phase three is the reporting part, and that's really on the assessors to get all the official EMAS documentation, the pre-assessment form, and the results form that'll go into the government systems. Now, phase four, if there are POAMs, there are certain security control objectives that can be labeled as POAMs and agreed upon, that will be fixed in a certain time frame. So, and that certain time frame needs to be within 180 days. There's certain security controls, and I know Michael and Brian will correct me. They can't be any of the security controls that would score 5. There's a list that we need to follow for that. Then the termination is made, that an OSC passes. That would be the certification decision, and that's when the information that we were filling in phase 3 would go into the EMAS system. The responsibilities of OSC would be to preserve that information for 6 years. There's a hashing value that's run on that information that also goes into those templates, those results that go into the government systems. Then 3 years, it'll be time for a renewal. And, in between there, you need to be maintaining your security compliance all along the way. And, that can take many forms. One thing we've had a lot of success with, hopefully this isn't advice, but with monthly cybersecurity meetings so that you're tracking, okay, where are we with our continual security processes. So I'll leave it at that and see if anybody else wants to chime in.
So I would just add, it's a 3-year renewal, but you don't wait 3 years to start. So about 2.5 years in, you want to reach back out to the C3PO if they haven't already reached out to you, right? I mean, as a reminder, because you're going to need time to get rescheduled. And this first time around in 3 years, there's probably going to be 70 or 80,000 companies still left trying to be assessed. So make sure you maintain a good relationship with that C3PO. Like I said at the beginning, interview a couple of them, make sure you work well with them, because that 3-year process comes up quickly because it's less than that.
And it's a really bad idea to wait 2.5 years until you look at it again, right? Once you get certified, it doesn't stop. It continues. You operate as a fully compliant organization for the entire time you have that contract, essentially, when the entire time you hold that certification. And any changes that are made and that sort of thing have to be tracked. And every year, that affirming official has to go up in the SPRS and put their head on the chopping block again and say, yeah, we're still operating the way we were, right? So it's an ongoing process. And to Michael's point, you definitely got to get your C3POs lined up, because 300,000 contractors getting some level of CMMC readiness is a lot. It's a pretty busy channel right now. So.
Well, these are all great comments, and looking at time, I'm going to say, Brian, can you do the avoiding problems slide in 30 seconds?
No, but I'll give it a shot.
Give it a shot.
Avoiding problem. The first big problem to avoid, right, is making sure that you don't provide an SSP that essentially, for lack of a better term, is vacuous, right? Your SSP needs to be a real thorough description of your environment. It needs to describe your system environment thoroughly. It needs to define your implementations thoroughly. And somebody in the Q&A asks a question about MSPs and use of MSPs. If you are using an external service provider, how you're using the external service provider needs to be described in your SSP. And how that is part of your implementation. That all needs to be part of that thing. So that SSP needs to be a real robust document, and it needs to also be a living document. So that's a big part of it, right? And of course, then avoiding problems scheduling. Don't have the assessors show up and say, "Oh, Sally from HR is on vacation this week," right? You got to make sure that all of the ducks in a row. And the planning process is going to help you with that, and you're going to lay all that out. So that's a major problem to avoid, that the right person isn't in the room to answer the question when the assessor asks it. And those external service providers need to be there. They need to be in the room. Well, in the room, technically, no who's in any room anymore. We're
Mhm.
all virtual, but they need to be there. Okay, and they need to be answering the questions for the parts of the assessment or the parts of the controls that they actually participate in. And if they're not there, it's going to cause problems. Okay, make
Yeah,
sure you
thank
have
you.
good internet connections is the last bullet, but that's hey, who
Yeah,
doesn't these days?
thank you for that.
Right.
Something we love is if you have a list of the people on your team and who's going to answer each question. That really can make life easy for you and for the assessor. All right, Michael, take a short swipe at phase two and avoiding surprises.
Okay, like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So if everything's done right in phase one and you're all organized, the assessment will go smoothly. The assessor is basically going to read you the question, which you already know, and you've given him your answer. He just wants to validate that your answer is there. So if you can't do that, that's the surprises you're going to get. Hey, the SSP said this, the access control policy had a different number, and the technical setting had a different number, right? So things to avoid and surprises would be ensure your documents match, right? So if you say it's 12-character password here, make sure it's 12 everywhere in any document that you reference. Um, like Brian said, it's very documentation heavy, this assessment. So you want to make sure they're all matching. We'll, surprises. OSCs will be notified if trending met, not met. So at the end of each day, we'll sum up what objectives and controls were completed and where you stand with that. You're going to have a good idea because if you're saying no, 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 you're kind of leading yourself right down that path where it's going. They're there to help though, so they're going to try and work with you and get you to the right answer if it's there, so that you can present it. So that was my 30 seconds.
All right, thank you. Yeah, often the answer is in the question. If you listen carefully to the question, you'll know, wait, maybe I should show them this thing that I have. It's not trying to give you the answer, it's trying to help you understand where your answer already is. All right, just briefly, phases three and four, the reporting, we talked about that 10-day window and closeouts, and you get your certificate. I want to move forward to lessons we've learned here before we go to questions and answers, and just talk about some of the experiences the assessors have had in actual assessments. Um, so for all three of you, I guess some tales from the trenches. What are things that you're seeing, key lessons here? We have some of them that you submitted ahead of time, but I'm just interested in any of your thoughts.
I'm going to jump back to gauge codes in preparation. This seems to be a very large problem. It's not inside the assessment, but you can't get a final result without having SPRS correct. And what do I mean by that? That's the higher level organizations are listed properly in SPRS and provided to the assessor. And then all organizations under that would show up. So the cage code number and name have to match. So when the assessors upload everything into EMAS, that's how it gets pushed over to SPRS. So every night EMAS pushes the closed out assessments to SPRS by HLO, whether the HLO is in the assessment or not, included in that boundary. You need that HLO because it can't find you in SPRS. So one of the first things you need to do is ensure all of those are correct. And give the assessor those exact numbers because it's going to go on your certificate and it's going to go into EMAS and track that way. Very important.
All right, Brian, any thoughts on?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it really has to do with preparation, right? And preparing for the assessment. The assessments that go really, really smoothly are the ones where the team, from the OSC team, knows exactly what it is they're going to show for every single control, every single assessment objective. And if they do that, it's like before the assessor even has the question out of their mouth, they're already showing the assessor something. Those assessments are just like a pleasure. There's the other ones that they don't do that prep, and you ask a question, and it's like, oh, let's see, which Active Directory GPO do I need to show for that? And they have to mull through it, and at 15 minutes later, you get the answer. And as an assessor, even though this is not my bailiwick, I've seen it so many darn times. I could tell you exactly where to go to find it. I'm not allowed to. I can't tell you. You have to know how to get there. Otherwise, how are you implementing this thing? Right? So just having that all kind of, I don't want to say, I mean, I use the word scripted out, but it's really, you need to rehearse with your team and that sort of thing. In fact, this is such a big problem, has been such a big problem in assessments I've been an assessor on, that I created a whole nother class on OSC preparation. So to help organizations really understand how to prepare, because it is such a critical problem that people have.
All
I
right.
just want to add, Colin, I know you want to go, but on that is what he said. The assessors know and understand the environments. We're conducting, eventually thousands of assessments, but right now, 40, 50, 60 assessments. So we sit through this all the time. So we know the answer, but we can't give it to you. We need to know that you know where to go when we're not there,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so we're not trying to point out that people are wrong or anything like that. When we're never doing that. And we hope that the OSCs don't get defensive. Like, we're not personally calling people out. We try to help that we can, but once you start getting defensive, it goes downhill from there. The assessment.
Yeah,
It's happened once or
we're trying to assess how you meet the requirement. We're not auditing you and trying to find a failure. We're trying to find a success. Colin, anything to add here before we move to questions and answers?
Just quickly, I am pretty consistently seeing in the initial SSP that I get where the scoping is incorrect. And what that causes is we go to the scoping call, and then the OSC has to scramble to get their scoping right. And the bigger ripple effect is scoping affects all your other documentation. So I can't emphasize enough, get the scoping correctly, get that written into your SSP, have some unbiased, knowledgeable third-party person go through it so that you get that correct, and then you can get the rest of your evidence in order.
Well, thank you for that. I'll just share that uh, we have seen I guess I'd call it a tale from the trenches where everything looks great and you've reviewed everything, and then somebody in the middle of the assessment says, "Oh, and we use this software product for XYZ," and it's nowhere in the documentation. It's not in the boundary. Um, so if you mention something, we are duty bound to pull that thread. So make sure everything's in there. All right. We want to give time for questions and answers. So certainly we'll have contact information at the end. Let's go into Q&A here. So we have a question here from Will. What are the cost differences between a mock and a formal assessment? What are you guys seeing in the market?
So I'll start. You can get different things with that. So you can buy just a mock and then not do it. We at CISEVE, we offer mocks and certifying assessments as a package, so it changes the pricing on it. But it depends on the approach for it. So we like to push package deals because we fully believe in the mock assessment helping the OSCs. So there's not much difference in pricing you shouldn't see, because it's the same level of effort, right? They're going to ask you the same 320 questions. They're not going to consult. They're going to write down everything as if it's a regular assessment. So the price difference is very small, which is why, sales hat on. That's why we sell a nice package.
Yeah, it's up to each C3PO to price how they do that. And I will say I've seen ranges from $15,000 to $50,000 for a mock assessment. Like, it's a broad range. And so what you want to do is really dig in and say, are you actually selling a mock assessment with just met and not met? Or are you selling a gap assessment with advice, but you're calling it a mock assessment? So really be sure to dig in and find out, what do they mean by a mock assessment? Because there has been some confusion and those definitions have been muddied. So mock assessment, the pure definition is you just are told met or not met. You might hear the term trending not met or trending met during the process. And a gap assessment is the same thing, but then getting advice as to how to get to a met status. Let's see. We have another question here. How much change of documentation is allowed between pre-assessment and the actual assessment? If the SSP notes something as planned to be implemented in pre-assessment, can it still be implemented before the assessment takes place? i.e., can you do a tabletop exercise to satisfy the requirement and provide evidence between the pre and actual assessment?
So the question's a little, I'm going to change the question for you, Will. During the assessment, the end of phase one is when you submit your final package, which is the final version of your SSP, and at which point you have to stop making changes to your system and stop making changes to the documents. So even during the scoping call, during pre-assessment conversations, you can change anything you want as long as it's clear. It shouldn't alter the scoping call, the scope and the boundary too much, because the initial agreement you have with the C3PO depends on how big or small that enclave is, or enterprise. So right up until the final submission, we allow you to make it, because we're not judging anything until you give us the entire package. Then you have to stop making changes unless agreed upon with the lead CCA.
Yeah, and the assessment isn't going to happen if there is a control that is not fully implemented. If you present us with an SSP and says, well, I have a concept for how I've done this. I've done a tabletop exercise to show how I'm going to do this. That is not going to be sufficient. We will say, no, we can't even start the assessment at that point.
Well, thank you for that. We had a question which I think we answered, but I just want to double click on it, and it's a question around mock assessments and certifying assessments and whether the MSP needs to be there. If I heard everybody correctly, anybody involved in providing one of the objectives has to be there to answer for that objective. So there's used to be the SRM, now it's the CRM, the customer responsibility matrix. Everybody has to be there, right? At the time the question's asked.
Yeah. And it's probably a whole nother webinar we need to do on external service providers and how those assessments are.
Ryan, I think every slide here could be a whole entire webinar.
It could definitely be.
All right, so there's a question here about how far in advance are assessments scheduled. M&S Group is currently scheduling 8 weeks out, so you can sign up and have an assessment start in 8 weeks. Michael, what's your lead time currently?
Yeah, same thing. So we look at that 8-week window. We don't feel that you should have to wait because there's not enough assessors somewhere. We bring in extra assessors if we start schedule. If we require to go further than that, we'll bring in more assessor teams to do the assessments. So you'd only have to wait about the 2 months, 8 weeks, but you need that to get through the paperwork anyway, right? So you need a 3 to 4 weeks to get through the paperwork and invoicing, all that fun stuff. And then for us, the duration is about a 4-week assessment, 5-week assessment duration, like Brian had talked about earlier. So it's about 8 weeks out from here to do anything.
Then Brian and
Ramparts,
Colin, your experience, what are you seeing?
So Ramparts is a candidate C3PAO. We should be authorized by the end of the month. So we have not been scheduling assessments. So
your book's clean, ready to go.
You're ready.
Yeah.
You have an open slate at the end of the month. Okay.
New line opening now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hearing all over the map, right, from across the C3PO community on wait time. Some are scheduling all the way out to the end of 2026 already, and filling up their teams, and they only have a set number of teams, and that's what they do. Others, it's 3 months. Others, it's 8 weeks. It varies all over the community and what people are scheduling out. But it's important to start the dialogue. An OSC needs to start that dialogue with the C3PO community now. I don't care where you are in your process. You should start talking to somebody.
Yeah, and I will share, you guys didn't ask, but you're probably curious. Depending on the complexity of your system, if you're a single location assessment, we're seeing prices range from $40,000 to $60,000. Again, it depends on the complexity of your system, what tools you're using, how many things, or the familiarity of the assessor with the system you're using, whether you're enclave or enterprise and what kind of enclaves, whether you're using people that are hosting. So this is sort of the range we're seeing right now. We're sure it will probably change as the uptick happens. Really appreciate everybody's time today and all the great questions. And here's some contact information for you. Please feel free to reach out to anybody on the call. I'm sure they're all eager to talk to you and try to be useful in any way they can. Thank you again for your trust and time today, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Everyone.
Take care, everybody.